Hello, this is Max Seaback, and in this video I will be showing you guys variables with trigger executions, which is a very important thing to understand. If you haven't watched the first video of my variables tutorial series, I recommend you watching it because that goes over the fundamentals. So, as you understand that to recap the first video where we changed the amount of candy and we added it via variables and then we printed it out, you see that we can do a lot of much more interesting stuff with very few triggers, because earlier we would have to use a different trigger for each different value to print out. So variables are very powerful. Now let's try to explain continue execution. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a door, and this is the door that goes into Candyland. And what this does is we are only allowed into Candyland if we have a certain amount of candy. Okay, so this opens the door only if we have enough candy. So how do we check? How do we check if we have enough candy? And this is where trigger executions come from. So I just made a very simple button on the trigger and made it infinite call, so we can just keep pressing it. And what I'm going to show you guys is this new trigger here. Continue trigger actions execution only if variable A is greater than variable B. And remember how we talked about the difference between names and values? I'm so sorry. And now we would compare against a variable, but let's just make it simple and just set a value. So let's see here. Continue execution if variable A has greater value than B. So let's remember this was a variable name, and we're going to continue execution trigger only if the amount of candy is over 15. Now anything else that gets activated after this action will only get activated if this is true. So what I can do to illustrate my point is, instead of having this trigger here, I will first have a text that says attempting to open Candyland door, and then just me, and then I'm gonna put the trigger continue trigger execution only if it's greater, also higher amount of candy and 15. And if it does, what I'm going to do is then just simply move the door up so we can enter Candyland. Okay, so let's see if this works. I'm gonna pause this video. Let's see, how did I do it? Control K. Okay, so let's try to open the door. Attempting to open candy door, but you notice that we didn't actually open the door. That is because the trigger executions did not. We did not continue execution the trigger because candy was not over 15. So let's increase the candy and to 15, and notice that we set it to only greater, so it must be higher, so at least 16. Now let's try, and now it opens. So now we understand trigger executions, and we can do a lot about this. We can say, for example, this triggers continue execution only if the center of region A to region B. This means that basically that if you have two regions, is the path between those, are those visible? In this case, it's not, because there's a wall between. But in this case, it's true. This is not directly variables, but it's nice to know. And we have also trigger execution if it's equal value B, and as we touched upon earlier, we can test it against a variable. So let's say that we can change the cost dynamically to enter Candyland. So then we would say continue execution only if variable A is greater than variable B, and instead of 15 we say candy price, and then we can then set the candy price at the start of the map like this, candy price, and then 16. And from there we can edit the candy price to something else depending on various factors. And let's see what other trigger executions we have. We have continue execution if well, that was basically it, I think. Yeah, so it's basically just testing if certain variables or values are higher or equal each other, which is great. Another thing to take notice is that values of variables can also be texts. It can also be text. It can not only numbers. If you try to add a number to a text or a text to a number, then it would display as not a value. So it will be not valid. It would kind of make an error. So you can't combine text and values, but you can combine text and values with values, and you can compare text with text and values with values. Okay? I hope that helps you in the next video.